Good day, and welcome to our online lecture on the second module of Communication 10, entitled Rhetoric and the Logic of Persuasion. For the course outline of our module, we will be discussing rhetorical situation, its definition and illustration, and its three constituents exemplified. Also, we will be discussing on Condor et al.'s article review, its summary, critique, and implications. We'll also be discussing Zappen's article's review, its summary, critique, and implications. Additionally, we'll also be discussing additional information on the difference between phonemics and phonetics and the types of discourses.
A rhetorical situation describes the nature of the context in which speakers or writers create a rhetorical discourse. It is the one that calls the discourse into existence. For example, the happenings during the American Civil War is the rhetorical situation that brought forth the urgency to call for a unified action. Hence, this situation led to the creation of the infamous rhetorical discourse known as the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. There are three constituents of a rhetorical situation. First is exigence, which is defined as an imperfection marked by urgency. It can be a defect, an obstacle, something waiting to be done, or a thing which is other than it should be. However, not all exigences are rhetorical. Non-rhetorical exigences include those that cannot be changed, such as death or natural disasters, and those that can be changed but not through a discourse. Rhetorical exigences, on the other hand, are those that are capable of positive modification, which requires discourse or assistance of a discourse. A good example of a rhetorical exigence is pollution, because it is an imperfection marked by urgency that can be changed through a rhetorical discourse. And through rhetorical discourse, actions may be corrected, which can result to pollution reduction. Other than exigence, the audience is also an important constituent of a rhetorical situation. To differentiate rhetorical audience from non-rhetorical ones, rhetorical audience consists only of those persons who are capable of being influenced by a discourse and of being mediators of change. Therefore, mere hearers or readers that are not change makers cannot be considered as a rhetorical audience. Moving on to the last constituent of a rhetorical situation, constraints are persons, events, objects, and relations that are part of the situation and have the power to constrain or drive decisions and actions needed to modify the exigence. Examples of constraints are beliefs, attitudes, documents, facts, traditions, images, interests, and motives.
Political rhetoric concerns strategies used in formal debates and in everyday political disputes. According to Kane and Patapan in 2010, rhetoric is central to democratic politics due to the essence of debate and discussion and because leaders are obliged to rule the sovereign people by means of constant persuasion. Democracy also requires a deliberative system whose linkages require rhetoric. The distinctive aspects of theory and research on political rhetoric are first, contemporary scholars of political theory tend to draw inspiration directly from classical writings, and second, authors often adopt a critical perspective in relation to their political agenda. Social and political psychology regards that rhetoric arose as a part of turn-to language, which expresses rhetoric as a form of strategic communicative action rather than expression of inner psychological processes, states, or traits. Psychological researchers studied political rhetoric in two ways. First, through discourse analytic approaches to assist identification of interpretative repertoires, and second, through conversation analysis for the fine-grained analysis of details of political speeches and arguments. Changes and continuities. Rhetoric may be regarded in three senses. First and most common is in its negative sense, where rhetoric means an empty declamation or dishonest artifice such as mere rhetoric or empty rhetoric or rhetorical question. Due to this, contemporary writers may still regard political rhetoric as an antithesis of action. Second, rhetoric in its positive sense is, according to the Roman rhetorician Quintilian, the science of speaking well and the study of the art of effective communication. Last, In its neutral sense of rhetoric, as stated by Aristotle, rhetoric functions not to persuade, but to discover the available means of persuasion in each case. Changing context of political rhetoric. Classical accounts regard only formal public speech, which comes from the Greek word orator, as rhetoric. Aristotle describes political oratory as argument that is concerned with weighing alternative future courses of action relating to finances, war and peace, national defense, trade, and legislation. Non-political oratory by Aristotle concerns judicial or forensic oratory practiced in the law courts, which focuses on questions of accusation, justice and truth concerning past events, and from epideiectic or ceremonial oratory. Contemporary authors, on the other hand, extend political rhetoric to informal talk, texts, photography and visual images, maps, film, digital communication, architecture, graphic art, and even food. According to Booth in 2004, rhetoric is employed at every moment when one human being intends to produce, through the use of signs or symbols, some effect on another. As time progressed, there have been many changes in the context of political rhetoric. Whereas classical rhetoric emphasized on the usage of loud voices to appeal to mass audiences, contemporary methods are mediated by text and electronic means to distal audiences. Whereas classical political rhetoric was predominantly formal, contemporary political leaders now often adopt an informal conversational style. There are two types of composite audiences. One is mixed with different starting points in relation to the communicator's topic, and two, multiple with different and possibly incompatible commitments in relation to the view under discussion. Recent trends in research on political rhetoric include argumentative strategies used to justify political participation and non-participation, and to present views concerning immigration, racism, multiculturalism, and citizenship, while still conforming to norms of public reason. Political engagement includes rhetorical strategies employed by social movements, protest groups, and e-activist groups. Formal political communication is present in parliamentary debates, political campaigns and marketing, high-profile speeches, texts or films, and historical documents. Contemporary issues related to political rhetoric include debates concerning national identity, immigration and citizenship, foreign policy, legitimization of war, and more recently, climate change, terrorism, and war on terror. Political rhetoric gives importance to the strategic use of metaphor, slogans, satire, humor, politeness, appeals to common sense values such as change, choice, and community, and recently expresses concern over the use of religious language and idiom. In the topic of political rhetoric and argumentation, Potter in 1997 suggested that descriptive discourse has an offensive or critical aspect which explicitly or implicitly seeks to undermine rival versions of events, and a defensive or justificatory aspect insofar as speakers attempt to shore up their accounts from attacks by rivals. In this sense, consensus is a strategic rhetorical construction according to Beasley in 2001, and Edelman in 1977, and Weltman and Billig in 2001. Rhetorical psychology includes arguing and thinking, which states that in every question, there are two sides to the argument, which are exactly opposite to each other. The human thinker serves as the deliberator, shuttling between contrary opinions. It also includes attitudes as advocacy, which mentions consistency in political opinions. Consistency is exemplified by public advocates who have decided upon a single stance and is orating upon the virtues of the chosen position, according to Billig in 1996. It should be noted that not all beliefs qualify as attitudes, according to Billig in 1988. Arguments, or logos, only make sense in relation to their alternative arguments, or anti-logo, such that to say that you're a pro-capital punishment means that you stand against abolition of death penalty, or to say that you are pro-life means that you are against pro-choice arguments. Everyday attitude avowals are often accompanied by reasons, whether supporting one's own views or criticizing competing views. In adopting a particular stance on a controversial issue, the need to maintain a consistent argument becomes a relevant concern. Consistency need not lead to rhetorical inflexibility. Rhetorical political analysis, according to Finlayson, recasts political decision-making as a collective argumentative activity, which sets the premise of democratic politics to the irreducible and contested plurality of public life. It suggests that political ideas are always turned into arguments or elements of contestable propositions, which, if they have to survive, must win adherents in the contest of persuasive presentation. Politics is therefore not characterized by beliefs and decisions, but by the presence of beliefs in contradiction with each other. It also states that political reasoning is necessarily dialogic, and any political theorist needs to justify their beliefs to others who may well adopt very different points of view. Policymaking involves the formation of political consensus by construction of agreement through the process of argument.
Finlayson's RPA versus Billig's rhetorical psychology. RPA focuses on formal political decision-making, while rhetorical psychology often focuses on private deliberation on the part of individuals. RPA focuses on political decision-making, the resolution of dispute, and the ways in which political actors may form the basis for collaborative action. In contrast, rhetorical psychology tends to stress the open-ended quality of argumentation. Third, RPA does not consider issues relating to the construction of self or social identity, while rhetorical psychology regards identity concerns as centrally and necessarily implicated in all political rhetoric.
Political rhetoric and identity. Identity in political rhetoric, or ethos in classical terms, is refused by some theories. Consubstantiality is the extent to which a speaker can persuade his audience. Contemporary political communicators employ strategies to achieve consubstantiality with the audience.
The first strategy employed by political communicators is avoiding and taking sides. It is concerned with how speakers present their own political projects as exercise to political consensus. Taking sides means simply to side with one group against another. An example is Pauline Hanson's maiden speech as analyzed by Rapley in 1998. She sided with the common people in opposition to the elite, ordinary people in opposition to the elite. Taking sides involves adversariality and cooperativeness, and also the context of hegemonic competition. Taking sides allows political communicators to be criticized for their adherence to such a position, making it an identity. Avoiding sides stems from the need to appeal to a large part of the universal audience. By avoiding parties or ideologies which are not acceptable to the larger audience, the politician may gather support. It involves presenting an argument in a way that incorporates a wide range of divergent points of view without mentioning what the issue actually is. Adversarial politics serve as own anti-logos, such as Obama's opposing the opposition, demonizing demonization, and opposing nobody except the politics itself. Rhetorical strategies are polyvalent in avoiding sides.
The second strategy employed by political communicators is explicit appeal to common in-group membership. This concerns how politicians appeal explicitly to broadly defined groups. In political action or mobilization, Riker and Hopkins argue that political leaders act as entrepreneurs of identity, first, regrouping diverse people into a single overarching category, second, framing the leader's political project as the norms and values of that category, and third, self-presentation as a prototypical in-group member. An example of this is when Scottish electoral candidates attempted to maximize their appeal by framing themselves and their audience in national terms. Left-wing Labour Party characterized Scots as egalitarian, welfarist, and opposed to privilege, while the conservative right party characterized Scots as hardworking and entrepreneurial.
The third strategy employed by political communicators is constructing aspirational identity. This strategy addresses aspirational categories and consubstantiality as a future rather than present condition. It includes constitutive futurity, according to Frank in 2010, which is a form of representation in which the object of a political address is projected into an undetermined future. It may be used when the speaker appeals to a group outside or on the margins of a particular political community. An example of this is Martin Luther's I Have a Dream speech, appealing for civil and economic rights to end racism in the United States. It establishes a common political horizon instead of present political in-group membership. There are implicit displays of rhetorical alignment, and these may be flagged implicitly through clothing, posture, style of speech, or use of pronouns. Since what communicators establish themselves verbally don't always reflect in their actions, theorists argue that there is a need to distinguish between explicit avowals or self-description and displays or public performance of identity. An example of clothing is described by Ahmed on how Jinnah used clothing to implicitly display multiple political allegiances. Flexibility and vagueness in the use of first-person pronouns. In order to maintain alignment with diverse political groups, communicators and political leaders may use segmental technique in addressing their audience. Segmental technique is employed by communicators addressing different sections of a composite audience sequentially. An example of this is Maitland and Wilson's 1987 analysis of the United Kingdom's Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, in which "we" could be used to align herself to the Conservative Party, the government, the British citizenry, and then to all right-thinking people. This is an example of strategic ambiguity to allow a variety of possible interpretations. It serves two main functions. First, that it may be acceptable by a heterogeneous audience, and second, that it leaves room for future flexibility in terms of arguments. Polemical ambiguity is the usage of dualistic formulations with vague wording so as to be unclear to potential allies on the audience, but alienated groups can perceive a clear message to which they can identify with. An example of this is Duncan's 2001 note on George W. Bush's heavy use of globe-sweeping antitheses such as right versus wrong, good versus evil, and us versus them, in which Bush used ambiguous pronouns such as we, you, and us, and phrases such as nations that aid or safe haven to terrorism, or harbor or support terrorism, which were unclear and hard to refute on epistemological or moral grounds.
Using pronouns to display complex political allegiances. Pronouns such as we and us can exclude either the speaker or the audience. Speaker-exclusive pronouns tends to express goodwill towards the audience, while addressee-exclusive pronouns tends to refer to a political party or the government, though this is not always clear to the audience, which makes it an ambiguity. Using first-person plural pronouns to convey ideological messages. Aside from enlisting an audience, first-person plural pronouns may also be used to make the audience relate to a message. An example is when authors start using we, referring to themselves and their audience, but then slip to using we to refer to the government, or our to refer to the economy, such as the strength of the economy, according to Fairclough in 2000. This involves the syntax of hegemony, which is the vagueness of a first-person plural pronoun, establishing a functional equivalence between a particular group and a universal humanity, according to Billig in 1995. Some politicians use the forked-tongue strategy to appeal to an audience. Forked-tongue strategy is when a speaker claims one identity while displaying a different set of allegiances and ideological commitments through deictic references, according to Condor in 2006. An example of this is an excerpt which says, "Fellow Scots, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. And when I say fellow Scots, I include all those categories excluded by Nicholas Fairbairn, and I also include all our English friends who live among us, and who have chosen to throw in their lot with us, more than a few, in which the speaker uses pronouns to implicitly exclude people born in England, such as our English friends from the Scottish national us. In conclusion to Condor et al.'s political rhetoric, rhetoric is reflexive, such that one uses rhetoric in writing on the subject of rhetoric. Difficulties in summarizing political rhetoric are because it is not easy to organize, as there is no single essential feature that can be used to distinguish research and theory on political rhetoric from work on political argument, debate, communication, or discourse. Political rhetoric is an artless art, wherein political leaders need to use rhetoric without appearing to do so. Political communicators use language and other symbolic resources flexibly, creatively, and ironically to construct new patterns of argument and to undermine the newly constructed claims of their opponents. This article by Condor et al. Carefully presents a critical and evaluative analysis of the different aspects of political rhetoric. The article, though, deviates from a distinctive aspect of theory and research on political rhetoric, which is stated as contemporary scholars of political theory tend to draw inspiration from classical writings, as it builds its arguments from various contemporary authors in order to describe and characterize political rhetoric. The main implication of this article to this course is that it teaches students to adopt a critical, perceptive, and knowledgeable approach to political rhetoric, amongst others.
On the topic Strategies of Self-Expression and Collaboration, Laura J. Garak thinks that the strategies of persuasion based on Aristotle's ethos, pathos, and logos motivate action and belief in online debates, while B.J. Fogg, on the other hand, shows how the computer itself functions as a persuasive type of technology. As a tool, it simplifies processes or customizes information. As a medium, it stimulates cause and effect processes, environments, or objects, as a social actor through various physical, linguistic, and social cues. He is interested in how computers, as persuasive technology, achieve credibility, ethos, and in the ethics of persuasive appeals, even appeals to emotions, pathos.
Barbara Warnick explores persuasion but in digital text, but also observes the potential of the media to transform traditional notions of rhetoric as persuasion. In the late 90s, when attracting women to the internet, she notes the failure of persuasive appeals in traditional print media, which were elitist and hierarchically motivated. But she also notes the success of web-based alternatives to mainstream media, offering various platforms for self-expression and interaction.
The writer of the paper, James Zappen, says that a dialogue is not for persuasion, but as a testing of one's own ideas, contesting of others' ideas, and a collaborative creation of ideas is possible in any medium, oral, print, or digital. New Digital Media Studies explains some of the basic characteristics of communication and digital spaces, and their difficulties. According to Garak, the characteristics are speed, reach, anonymity, and interactivity. And these characteristics in accord with our everyday experiences with digital communication technologies, but raise some difficulties. Levmanovich questions whether terms such as digital and interactivity have any real meaning. He finds in the new media characteristics of numerical representation, modularity, automation, variability, and transcoding. Manovich questions the term digital, which refer to analog to digital conversion, common representational code, or numerical representation, only the last having any relevance. He then questions interactivity since it states one of the most basic facts about computer structures and operations is that they are redundant. Andres Fagerjord accepts the key characteristics but emphasizes the communicative aspect and observes the tendency of the modularized and variable components of web media to come together in a process he calls rhetorical convergence. Warnick's analyses show how the new media are used to form identities and communities. Other analyses explore the processes of forming identities and communities as a complex interaction, both online and offline, between ourselves and others, providing context and meaning for the term interactivity. Rhetorical explains the processes of identity formation as interactions among multiple versions of our online selves and between these and our real selves. Jonathan Johnson Ilola points out that the hypertext not only invites readers to participate in making the text, but forces them to do so, requiring both readers and writers to become co-learners. Carolyn R. Miller observes that the identity formation as the creation of human character is associated with Aristotle's understanding of ethos, and the nature of the interaction is complex, with negotiations between our many representations of ourselves and our listeners and readers, and not the least between our many selves and the computer structures and operations. The formation of communities of shared interest is an outcome of processes of interactions. Numerous studies have documented the close connection between online and offline communities. Annabel Quanhas and Barry Wellman observe a reciprocal relationship between the aforementioned communities and net increase in social ties. Similarly, Soren Matei and Sandra J. Balrokich claim a the more relationship between online and offline communities, regardless of gender, income, age, education, and ethnicity. The paper was not able to fully contextualize the online and offline rhetoric of the readers because of a lack of mechanization regarding the digital discourse processes. The differences between how the person communicates and behaves online and offline were not expounded properly because it lacked a concrete example and comparison between the online and real self, which is why the importance of holistically understanding their digital identity, communities, and ideas formation from their offline living was not able to be centered in the paper. There was not a detailed comparison of how different print media is compared to online platforms. Thus, a lack of explanation on how print media's rhetoric differed from online rhetoric. How different would the process of discourse be affected by the presence or absence of a computer? Instead of pamphlets or posters were not mentioned, and their impacts were not given enough gravity. The people of today no longer understand the true importance of communication since it has been taken for granted due to its online accessibility. Present communicators don't observe how others behave around one another and are not attentive enough to point out the patterns and intentions behind texts and messages. Studying digital rhetoric will help us identify the structures within online social media platforms that contribute to our identity and community's formation. We are then able to understand how technology has shaped the way we transmit our culture and become who we are.
Phonemics is also known as phonological representation, phonological transcription, or phonological labeling. It is considered as a broad transcription because it does not give specific details of the sounds in their context. It aims at representing sounds as they belong to only one language. It represents phonemes employed in the production of a word or an utterance. It involves representing speech using just a unique symbol for each phoneme of the language. It represents abstract mental constructs, as phonemes are just abstract sounds that we store in our minds and use for references. This is placed between forward// brackets. Some examples of phonemics are shown in the presentation above. Phonetics is considered as a narrow transcription because it gives all kinds of details. It aims at representing allophones. Allophones are sounds or signs used to pronounce a single phoneme in a certain language. Phonetics includes every single aspect of every single sound. It involves representing additional details about the contextual variations in pronunciation that occur in normal speech. It has diacritics or extra labeling symbols that are added to formal phonemic symbols to show every possible nuance. While phonemics is enclosed in forward// brackets, phonetics is placed between braces. Some examples of phonetics are as follows. As you can see, there are more symbols used in here than those in phonemics because this expresses sounds in a more accurate and specific way. Political discourse is a text determined by the theme of expression and asserting interest of political subjects considered in a situation of political communication. The recipients in political communicative events, the people, the citizens or masses, become actively involved. This makes people as citizens and at the same time voters. Political discourse is also seen as a form of political action. It serves as a pan of the political process, a form of social action and interaction. It compromises a wider field of politics. For example, propaganda, campaigning, canvassing, and media interviews. Political discourse is about influencing or being influenced by citizens or public opinion.
Discourse analysis is the analysis of language that does not merely focus on the technical level, but instead looks at it beyond the sentence. It is the study of how language, both written and spoken, is used between people and the context in which they are used. Conversation analysis is an approach that aims to describe and analyze language as a basic feature of human social interaction by looking at how people perform actions between one another and how these actions are organized. It is done through a set of methods with the use of audio and video recordings of text and social interaction. Critical discourse analysis is an approach to the study of discourse in which language is seen as a form of social practice that highlights the construction of knowledge, identity, power, and social relations in institutions through oral and written text. It aims to uncover the ideologies and power hidden behind discourse and how these influence how people understand certain texts.
That is the end of our online lecture. Thank you for listening.